Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Now that I'm done yelling and screaming, I do kind of want to talk about some of these conference championship games because it's going to be a really fun weekend in college football. And if things go par for course, we should have a really good playoff between Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. And I think that's what's going to happen. And I'm not predicting any crazy upsets. But let's get into some of these games. And I do want to start with the SEC. I do think Florida-Bama is the most interesting because I do think, as I just mentioned a minute ago, that the committee has set it up where if Florida beats Alabama, they're going to go ahead and sneak Florida, figure out a way to get them into that Final Four. I think they would anyway. I would think that they would. I don't know that they would. I think it would depend on if Ohio State wins and if Notre Dame wins. But I think they would get Florida in. But I think it's an interesting conversation. I've heard a lot of conversation about Florida this week. And the argument on behalf of Florida keeping this game close. And I want to just talk about the games, kind of how I see them going. So let's start with the SEC, and the argument that I hear about Florida keeping this thing close is, well, now they got nothing to lose, right? Last week they were playing LSU. They beat LSU. They have a shot at the playoff. This week they really got no shot, so they're going to play loose. I don't buy it. First of all, I just think Alabama is a freaking wagon, man. They are a juggernaut, and it's crazy because, I've talked in the last couple weeks about Alabama. I think you can make the argument this is Saban's most dominant team because of the fact that the offense is humming at a historic level and the defense after a few down years has come back around. But what I did not mention on last episode, which I probably should have, or really on Monday's episode, I think you can legitimately make a case that Alabama just completed the most dominant regular season, or one of the most dominant, or at the very least impressive regular seasons that we've ever seen. First of all, 10-0 record against an SEC-only schedule. That's incredible. They're the only team in the history of college football, as best as I know, maybe something happened in 1941 that I don't know about, but in modern history, they're the only team in college football to go 10-0 in an SEC season. On top of that, they beat everybody by at least 17 points. At least 15 points. The closest game was ironically Ole Miss. They beat two teams currently in the top 10, Texas A&M and Georgia, by 17 plus. They put up at least 40 points in their last 9 games of the season. The only game that they didn't put up 40 points was the opener against Missouri, and I watched that game, and they basically pulled their starters after 2 minutes and could have scored 60, or not 2 minutes, after 2 quarters, and could have scored 60 if they wanted to, but pulled the starters to get the backup some reps. And oh, by the way, the defense has been humming. They haven't given up more than 17 points in the last 7 games since that Ole Miss game. And so when I look at Bama, I know we have this narrative of, this is the best pass offense they've seen all year. Well, guess what? This is the best pass defense that Florida has seen all year. This Alabama defense is humming. They actually have the best pass defense in the SEC, one of the top 10 in the country. And I just think, for all the talk about, Bama hasn't seen anything like this. Well, Florida hasn't seen anything like this either. Every year we want to make the SEC East team into a legitimate competitor. Last year, LSU blew out Georgia. This year, I just don't think it's close. Alabama gets big leads early. They're going to destroy this Florida defense. I think it's over by halftime, and I think Alabama wins convincingly. I think it's kind of crazy. The point spread is, quote-unquote, only 18 when you factor in that Alabama's won by at least 17 in every single game. I don't know that the Texas A&M team that they beat is significantly better or worse than Florida. So it's kind of crazy, but I do think Alabama is going to win the SEC championship. ACC championship, ironically, maybe has a little bit more intrigue because the scenario with the ACC is very simple, and I'm not the first person to say it, but it's good to kind of just rehash, get your guys' minds in what could happen as we head towards this playoff. And what could happen is a couple different things. First of all, if Notre Dame wins this, Clemson ain't going to make the playoff. And I mean, think about a scenario where Trevor Lawrence fought so hard for this season, and now he's not competing for a national championship. He's not in the playoff. You wonder if he'd even play in a bowl game at that point. So that's kind of crazy. And then I think there's the other extreme, which is if Clemson wins in a blowout, like if Clemson wins 41-10, is it possible that Notre Dame gets left out altogether in favor of, say, Texas A&M? Now, I'm not sure that that would necessarily happen, because if that were to happen, that would mean that, one, you'd leave out Notre Dame, who was 10-1, regular season champion of the ACC. Two, you'd be putting in a Texas team that already got smoked by Alabama. And I just don't see that happening. Now, what I would also say I don't see happening is Clemson blowing out Notre Dame. And it's kind of crazy because the point spread is 10, 10.5, 11, depending on where you're getting it. I think that's a crazy high number for this game. And the reason being, I understand that Trevor Lawrence didn't play in the first game these two teams played. But guess what? Trevor Lawrence, DJ Uiagalelei, Clemson's quarterbacks are not the reason that they lost that game. If you remember, they lost that game because Notre Dame had over 500 yards of total offense, because they averaged 5 yards per carry on the ground and were blowing Clemson off the line of scrimmage on the defensive line. And oh, by the way, Clemson couldn't block anybody up front themselves and averaged 1 yard per carry with Travis Etienne. And so I will say Clemson's a different team. First of all, Trevor Lawrence is going to be back. The defense has gotten a lot healthier. Their best defensive player, James Stalsky's back. But I just don't see this being a 10-point game. It's just crazy to me that it's a 10.5-point spread. I think that the things that made Notre Dame successful have not changed. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think they're going to be physical. I think they're as physical as any team in the country. Now, Clemson's better too now. Clemson's better too since Trevor Lawrence got back. They have blown out two teams. They beat Pitt and Virginia Tech 52-17 and 45-10. But I just don't see this scenario where it's a total blowout. Maybe I'm just a total square and I'm just, this is why Vegas always takes my money. But I just don't see the scenario where Clemson blows out Notre Dame. I think it's close. I think it's more likely we get a Notre Dame win than we do a Clemson blowout in terms of Clemson winning big. But again, it'll be fun to see, and I think there's the most interesting playoff scenarios that can come out of this, out of the entire day, will come out of this game. In terms of the Big Ten championship game, let's go there next. That one obviously has the biggest playoff. You could argue maybe the single biggest, result could come out of that game. Because if Florida upsets Alabama, Florida still might not get in, right? Alabama might still be in. And no matter what happens in the Notre Dame-Clemson game, there's a possibility that both teams get in, and there's a possibility that one team gets left out. But in the Big Ten, it's winner take all. And Ohio State has no margin for error here. And so to me, this is the single most fascinating game in this weekend, because Ohio State's got to win. They're playing a team that they're clearly superior to. And I do think this is going to be competitive. Northwestern is the best defense that Ohio State will have played all year. And that is the thing that I don't think anybody is talking about with this Ohio State conversation. And it's something that I've mentioned on this show quite a bit. But Ohio State, there are some good teams in the Big Ten. Ohio State didn't play any of them. And that is where, to me, the bigger argument about Ohio State is. It's not that they're only going to play 6 games. It's that the teams they played weren't even good, right? Like, Penn State's terrible this year. Nebraska's terrible this year. The best win they had was against Indiana. That was by 7 at home, and they barely won the game. And so when you look at the best defenses in the Big Ten, Northwestern's number 1, but Iowa's 2, Wisconsin's 3. Ohio State has not faced any of them. This is by far the best defense statistically that Ohio State will have faced all season long. And so because of it, I'm just really intrigued. I do think on the flip side, I don't know that Northwestern is dynamic enough offensively to really do what's needed to do to pull off the upset. But I could see the scenario where this game is, 16-6 at halftime and Ohio State wins 28-12 or something, or 28-14. I don't think it's going to be the blowout that everybody thinks they will. I do think Ohio State wins. I think they win convincingly enough to get into the playoff. But this is a game that I do think can be closer than a lot of people think, because I think Northwestern, especially on the defensive side of the football, is better than people think. 2 other games, they obviously don't have as much meaning. We'll start with the Big 12, where Oklahoma and Iowa State play. And for people who have forgotten, those 2 teams did play earlier in the year. Iowa State beat Oklahoma at home 37-30. It was a game that I think was really reflective of, we might have a special season here at Iowa State. And sure enough, they did. finished the regular season 8-2. They're number 6 in the polls, which is nonsense, as I just told you. But they are still number 6 in the polls. Good for them. It's a historic season. But I do like Oklahoma in this game. And I'll say this about Oklahoma, is I was critical of them early, but they are an organization, a program. I don't know why I said organization because that's more of a pro thing. But they are a team that has really evolved and gotten better over the course of this year. I mean, they started 1-2 with those back-to-back losses to Kansas State and Iowa State, but they've ripped off since then 6 straight wins. They've put up 50 points in 3 of those games, 40 points in 4 of those games. Spencer Rattler, their quarterback's gotten better, and they've gotten back their best running back, Ramondre Stevenson, who was out for the first game. And oh, by the way, Oklahoma's actually playing real defense this year. Now, maybe the Big 12 is just bad, but Oklahoma's one of the top 2 defenses along with Iowa State in this conference, and I think Oklahoma's actually probably better than people realize. As a matter of fact, I would argue that while I think Cincinnati is grossly being screwed in the number 9 spot, Oklahoma is probably the most quote-unquote underrated team. Now, I don't know if I'd put them any higher than they are, but I think they're playing about as well as anybody right now. And when I look at this game, look, I do think Oklahoma's going to win. This isn't a knock on Iowa State. It's not to say, Iowa State's overrated, typical, we prop up the no, they're a really good football team. But they beat Oklahoma earlier in the year when Oklahoma clearly wasn't the same team. And then a few weeks ago, that signature win against Texas that frankly almost got Tom Herman fired was more about Texas mismanaging the clock and a weird fake punt on 4th down. I think Iowa State's a really good team. I think they're one of the top 8, 10, 12 teams in the country. I don't think they're better than Oklahoma. I don't think they're the best team in the Big 12, and I do think Oklahoma wins. Finally, in the Pac-12, this one to me is weirdly interesting. USC is playing Oregon. Oregon is replacing Washington, who could not play because of COVID. But USC is just a really interesting team. 5-0. In 3 of their wins, they were down going into the 4th quarter. And so I actually like Oregon to pull the upset. I think Oregon is better coached. I think they have, frankly, as much talent. And I think USC is just lucky to be where they are. But what I would tell you is this, and I don't know if it's going to happen, but here's a storyline to watch. If USC wins this game, let me say this. If I was Clay Helton, you know how I would handle this? If USC is to win this game, and I was Clay Helton, I would go to the podium after the game and bang my fist on the table that we deserve a shot at the playoff. Because as I said on Monday's episode, Ohio State is 5-0 with 1 good win. They might get a second one against Northwestern. That would make them 6-0, the Big Ten champ. USC is 5-0, trying to go to 6-0 and be the Pac-12 champ. And if I'm USC, I'm banging the drum saying, how are we ranked number 12 in the country? How are we ranked where we are? And Ohio State, with the exact same record against not an impressive schedule, is ranked number 4 in the country. I'm not saying we should put USC in. Not only are they not the 4th best team in the country, I don't think they're probably the 14th best team in the country. But again, we have to hold everyone to the same standards as we do other teams. And Ohio State is being held to a standard of if they win, they're in. And if I'm USC, I'm sitting there saying, look, I'm not saying if we win, we're in. But if we win, we should probably be ahead of Texas A&M. If we win, we should probably be ahead of whoever wins the Big 12. If we win, we should probably be ahead of Cincinnati. If we win and Ohio State loses or Clemson loses, we should probably be in at number 4. So that, to me, is the most interesting thing, not what is going to happen on the field Friday night, but what could potentially happen off the field, where I do think USC has a strong – I don't think they're very good, but I think they have a strong case and argument to be made that they should be in that college football playoff conversation if they win that game.